You won't believe me, but I'm actually filming this again. This is the second time I'm filming this. The audio was awful because I forgot to attach something, and so I just thought, yeah, I can't put this out. I need to do it again. I still remember the very first book I read in English, and let me tell you, it was not a good experience. It took me a whole year to finish it. I would translate every single word. It was quite a long book. It was like, looking back, I went to the bookshop and I was like, okay, I'll get this one. Maybe 500, maybe 400. I don't know, but it was a long book. It was very challenging. I still remember that, it took me so long, partly because, I was really busy. I was doing bachillerato, which, if you're not very familiar with the Spanish educational system, is a preparation for you to go to uni. So they prepare you to take these exams that then let you go to university. So it was very intense. I didn't have much time for like hobbies and, just doing things for fun. But I was very obsessed with English still, so I was like, I need to do this. And so I read this book, and I would be translating every single word. But what I didn't know then that I know now is that not all words are created equal. So when you're reading a text, when you're listening to someone, when you're listening to something, when you're listening to native speakers, you need to realize that not all words are important for you. They might be important for someone else. There are two things here. So there are words that are important for everyone. Any language learner, you need those words. But then there are a lot of words that are very language learner specific. So you need to be thinking, okay, what are my interests? What are things that I talk about in my native language? What are those things? Because you need to make your language learning experience very much like real. It has to be real. And if you're learning about vocabulary that maybe you don't really use in your native language, maybe you use but like rarely, it's not useful. Like, you're just wasting your time. Looking back, this is something I wish someone had told me. When you're getting that input, there are going to be many words that you don't need to know right now. Because I don't know about you, but I remember I used to have this urgency that I need to know everything. I need to know everything to be a successful language learner. But now I've realized that you become a successful language learner when you're able to communicate with the tools you have, articulate your message with the vocabulary that you currently have. And that's going to change over time. The more time you put in, the more vocabulary you're going to have, the more nuances you're going to be able to capture, to express. But that takes time, and you need to be patient. My point is that really what you need to be looking for is, with what I know now, can I communicate? Can I get my message across? Because that's what matters. The issue is that because we are so used to, speaking with so much nuance in meaning, that when you start learning a foreign language, you start learning a second language, you want that right away. But the most useful thing you can do for you as a language learner is, especially when you are not very advanced, communicate as simple as you can. Try to increase your vocabulary over time, but don't get obsessed with it. And if you don't know a word, try to communicate the same thing in a way that your syntax, your grammar is simple. You can't be making very complex sentences, very complex structures. You can try, and I encourage you to, learn new constructions and stuff. But if you get stuck, try to express it in a simple way. You're still translating. You're thinking of something in your native language and you want it to be the same. With language learning, it doesn't work like that. You need to adapt. My advice is learn new words, but make the vocabulary you learn very specific. make it very much like, so every time you're learning something, ask yourself, would I use this phrase with my friends? If I were speaking my native language, is this something I would say? Obviously, your why is very important, because as language learners, we learn a language for different reasons. We have different motivations. So you need to be thinking about what your motivations are, and then make it very specific, make it about you, and also please don't compare yourself to others, because maybe what someone else is doing makes no sense to you. It makes no sense to your own language journey. There's this expression in English, comparison is the thief of joy. It also applies to language learning. So this video could be very long, but I'm gonna try and make it short. So it depends, it's going to very much depend on your level. If you're a beginner, please focus on high frequency words. So those are words that we use daily. You know, there's this rule, the 80-20 rule, or 28, something like that. And it also applies to languages. When you learn a new word, ask yourself, is this 80% or is this 20%? I'll give you a personal example. So I'm self-employed, and you know that in schools we don't really learn anything about finance and like the real world. So now I'm learning so much about that in Spanish. I'm learning words that are very specific to this world, and a couple of years ago I had no idea they existed. But now, because I have that need, that I need to know these words because it's my job, I'm learning them, and I'm learning about concepts, I'm learning about vocabulary, and I'm learning this in Spanish, and Spanish is my native language. So if this is happening to me with my native language, why don't you accept that with your second language it's also going to happen? There are going to be situations where you're gonna have to be okay with not knowing a very specific word, but then when you need it, you've got your phone, you can look it up very quickly. So don't get obsessed with words, with learning absolutely everything, every single word that's in a language. And similarly, I'm also learning these in English, because now maybe I talk about my job with friends, and I also want to communicate those nuances. Another thing is active and passive vocabulary. So, when you read, reading and listening is great because you're going to acquire so much passive vocabulary. When you read a text and you're learning new vocabulary, those words become your passive vocabulary. And the way you make that into active vocabulary so you can use it daily is by actually using them. So let's say you have a diary, you keep a diary in your target language. I want you to use the words you learn. If you're doing language lessons, I want you to use your new words in class. So basically, for you to make passive vocabulary into active, you need to get exposure. So listen, read those words as much as you can, and also actually use them in conversation, writing. Use them and make them very personal. So think of examples, think of situations where you could actually use them. Think of your native language, think of when you're with friends, with family, think of the things you talk about, and try to put those words into use. And then there are going to be other words that are going to be passive, but you don't need to worry about them because they're gonna become passive vocabulary because you actually don't need them. So when you listen and when you read, you're learning so many things. For example, when you're listening, you actually also learning phonetics, you're learning about sound production, and you're getting that input. So one thing is understanding, and another thing is production. This applies to vocabulary, but it also applies to pronunciation. So for example, with vocabulary, you learn a word, you understand it, but then it might take you a while to actually produce it. and for it to become active. And for pronunciation, you maybe listen to a word and you identify the sound, but it might take you a while to be able to produce it. And also, something very important is I remember I learned this in phonetics when I took English phonology, and it is the thing that if you can't identify a sound, you're not going to be able to produce it. So you first need to get a lot of input and listen to the language a lot, and then work on your pronunciation and work on your production. But if you're struggling with listening, especially if you're struggling with listening comprehension, that's because you're not aware of those differences when it comes to sounds. And you need to first be aware of them. And then if you want to work on your pronunciation, you can work on that. But first, you need to listen a lot. And then by getting that awareness of the sounds of this language, you will also improve your comprehension so much. I'm really passionate about this skill that comes with language learning, which is reading a text or listening to something and being like, okay, is this useful for me? Is this not useful for me? And making that distinction. But I remember in the past, I really struggled with this, and I really struggled with differentiating between words that I should be focusing on and words that I shouldn't worry about. If you have any ideas, any worries, any language learning content you would like to see, let me know as well, because I've got some ideas. But if there's something specific you would like to see, let me know, because it's always nice to, hear from you and the kind of videos that you would like to watch.